So in listening to the Dharma, it's quite important to have a relaxed and kind-hearted attitude. So relaxed so that we can really take the teachings in, and kind-hearted so that we can have a proper motivation. So we're not just here because that's what happens at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're not just here because, everybody else is here, but to really have the attitude thinking of all of the countless sentient beings who want happiness just like we do, and extending to them the wish that they have happiness and freedom from suffering in the same way that we extend to ourselves that wish to be happy and free of suffering. And then to turn our mind to work for their benefit, which also means accomplishing our own welfare, our own purpose. So accomplishing our own purpose leads us eventually to the Buddha's Dharmakaya, to actualize that, and accomplishing the purpose of others leads us eventually to the enjoyment body and emanation bodies that work directly for the benefit of others. So with a long-term view, with a kind heart, with a receptive attitude, then we listen to the Dharma. Venerable Sumten sent around an email saying, this is why we don't take refuge in religious institutions. And it was an article from the Canadian Press about the Pope's recent statement. There were 2 books that came out last week talking about corruption in the Curia, and he kind of said these books are not at all helpful, and they just stir up a lot of things, and so on, and said these people who wrote the books betrayed the trust of the Vatican in, revealing these scandals, and that, slowly they've been trying to address these scandals. And what I thought was interesting, Pope's in an awkward position because on one hand he has to reform those people, on the other hand he has to also treat them nicely because they're the ones that have those jobs, and he can't fire them all at once because they're the only ones who know what's going on. But it's interesting that he criticized the people who revealed the scandals, as betraying the trust, when to the public it's the people who did the illegal things who betrayed the trust. Yeah, and somehow that wasn't being acknowledged in so many words. It was only said that, they were taking steps to change it. So this is a very good example about, not taking refuge in religious institutions that are, created and run by human beings who are not liberated beings, And I think this goes for, any religion, This is kind of the case. Like I told you, if you read Melvin Goldstein's history of Tibet, it reads like a murder mystery. And, and some of these were nobles involved, and some of them were monastics who were involved. Yeah. But the whole idea of talking about this is not to point the finger at other people and say religious institutions are corrupt, therefore religions are worthless, because that's not true. The religion and the ideals, that they're trying to get across to human beings are very noble, talking about kindness and forgiveness and compassion and ethical conduct. So that's something we have to affirm. But the religious institutions, like I said, that are operated by human beings, that's a different ballgame, and individuals may or may not put those teachings into practice. So it's very good to have a system in place that makes it difficult for, how do you say, corruption, bending the truth to happen. And, in that way I'm quite happy at the Abbey. The way we set it up from the beginning on the advice of our accountant was that the people who had access to the money in the accounts did not have access to the accounting books. And the people who have access to the accounting books do not have access to the money. So, it makes it difficult to take money and cook the books and cover it over. And while we all trust our office manager to count the money, we know she's completely honest. Still, she's chosen to have somebody else come in whenever she counts the cash, just as a way of showing people, look, this is all going for the purpose it was intended. And, very important in religious institutions that whatever people offered the money for, that it gets used for that particular purpose, that it doesn't get channeled into something else without asking the benefactor's permission. Okay, so similarly, if somebody gave a donation to an individual, but then someone in the community says, oh, well, this is for the community, and takes it and gives it to the community, that's not proper. Or somebody gives something to the community, and somebody says, oh, I want that, and take it. Similarly, diverting offerings to different people, diverting the purpose of the offering. So it's something that we have precepts about in the Pratimoksha, the monks and nuns precepts, and then just on an ordinary level, it actually falls under stealing. So I remember many years ago, someone had the idea to make a collection to get a rather large Taurus statue, and money was given for that purpose. We still don't have the Taurus statue. That person kind of jumped the gun, but the money is still there, and when we have a place to put a large Taurus statue, then we will definitely use those funds to get the Taurus statue. We haven't done it yet because there's no place to put it. And actually now, since the earthquake in Nepal, I wonder if the place where they make the really beautiful statues, how much damage occurred to that place. Okay, so just a little bit about that, and how important it is if you have a position in a the administration of a religious institution, that you really are impeccable in your standards of how you do things, because otherwise it gets especially when it regards money, other things, if the building code says that the wall has to be 10.5 inches from something, and you make it 10 1/4 inches instead, most people are not going to get upset about you doing that. They understand that. Okay, but if you say you're collecting money for something and then it goes for something else, then people, feel quite betrayed. So it's very important if you have that kind of responsibility, and here's where we can see examples of these two major mental factors that we talk about: integrity and consideration for others. So if we have a sense of integrity, then we refrain from mishandling things based on our own sense of who we are, what kind of person we want to be, what kind of Dharma practice we have. Yeah, and so we refrain from that on that basis. If we have consideration for others, then we realize our behavior influences other people and could make other people lose faith. And so as a result, we don't act improperly because we don't want to damage other people's faith. Yeah? So those two are two of the 11 virtuous mental factors. The absence of those two are two of the auxiliary afflictive mental factors. Okay? So they're quite important. And then also involved in this is conscientiousness, a mind that cherishes ethical conduct. So it's very important that we have that mind that cherishes ethical conduct and wants to be an ethical person. And another mental factor called heedfulness, or the lack of it, is heedlessness or negligence. Yeah. So it's a mental attitude of, well, I just don't care, that's just a little detail, or nobody's going to know, or it's not so important, and, ethical conduct. Yeah, the strict things I keep, but the rest, let go to the wind. So a kind of negligent, heedless attitude that doesn't pay attention to these kinds of things. Yeah? And so we can see that if we have the afflictive mental factors in this regard, they really, they seem to be, just small things, but they lead us down a slippery slope. Yeah, that is quite dangerous. So this is one way, I think, in which a community really helps each other, is when people, don't feel comfortable about something, they bring it up and it gets discussed. Yeah. Of course, when you have a huge institution, like the Curia, then it becomes really hard, because the more people you have, you can't keep track of all of them. And, there's all these politics and different relationships, and so people are afraid to bring things up. And, I don't envy the Pope. Yeah. Not a nice position to have to be in. Okay. But, when we see those kinds of things, to, not to point the finger and say, oh, look what they did. Oh, what a terrible institution. That's not the point. The point is, when we see things like this, to say, wow, look at how detrimental that is to the individuals involved and to the public, and therefore I have to be very careful myself that I don't go in that direction. Yeah? So that's a good way always, when we see other people doing things that are non-virtuous, instead of having a negative, critical, judgmental attitude towards them, saying, this is a teaching for me not to act like this. Yeah. And then we avoid, anger and criticism and cynicism, and we actually learn something from it. Yeah. And so this is the kind of thing I know when I do purification practice, like 35 Buddhas or Vajrasattva, that they have us confessing actions that we may not have done this life, but we've seen other people do those things, and since we've had plenty of time in previous lives to have done them ourselves, there's no reason to get arrogant and think, I'm above that, but rather to say, whenever I have acted like that in a previous life, I confess and I want to purify that. And I make a strong determination not to get involved in those kind of actions in this lifetime. or in any of my future lifetimes, not just this lifetime. Okay? And then we can use what we see in the world and the mistaken actions other people have made. We use those to help us in our own practice. Yeah, instead of just criticizing. Yeah. Although I must say, as Americans, we like to joke about politicians and be very we have a funny sense of humor about our politicians. Actually, it's not just Americans. It's, the whole idea of satire. Yeah. So, in Asian cultures, satire is not good. You don't do it. It's too offensive to people. But in our culture, satire and making fun of people in public positions is just kind of seen as what we do, isn't it? Yeah, it's it's a funny way of bonding us together with other people. Yeah. But, there's a purpose, like for political cartoons and some things like this. Sometimes they really illustrate something much clearer than a whole essay can. Okay. Oh, was there a question? Okay, then there's a question here. So, a quote from the book: "The very factor that causes something to arise also causes it to cease." Okay, so the question is about that. And basically, rather than read the whole thing, the question boils down to, is that, quote, speaking about our ability, is it referring to each moment of the existence of something, or is it referring to the whole gross existence and gross impermanence of something? It's referring to both, because the two are not distinct. You can't have gross impermanence without having subtle impermanence. Yeah? So the very factor that causes something to arise also causes it to cease. What's the very factor that causes something to arise? It's cause. Yeah. Is any kind of causal energy static, permanent, everlasting? No, it can't be, because if it were, it couldn't change and produce a result. Yeah? So if a cause were permanent, then it could not change and produce the result, because the whole thing about causality is to have a result, the cause has to cease. You can't have a result without the cause ceasing. Can we, So you might say, but, a mother has a baby and the mother doesn't cease when she has the baby. But there we're not talking about the gross mother ceasing, but whatever moment of the mother it was that had the baby, she's no longer that age, she's no longer the same person, she's something different in the next moment. So that's on a more subtle level, yeah. But you see when you have the subtle change, then with the objects that can totally discontinue, that's how you get to the total discontinuation, is these little bits of change. Yeah, there's no other way for it to happen. So our mind likes to think that something comes into existence, then it remains permanent for a while. And we think that because we don't see any gross change. Yeah, this bowl, it's still the same, isn't it? I mean, sorry, it's a gong. Or it's a hat. Didn't we decide the other day it was a hat that gives you a headache? But, it's even though the thing looks like it hasn't changed on a gross level. It has changed, hasn't it? I mean, even science tells us that, because on an atomic level, I mean, the particles are all zipping around each other at amazing speeds, never staying, the same. So it's not like this came into being and now all the electrons and protons and neutrons and quarks and all the other guys in there, they're all fixed in space, around their orbits. But, how can they have an orbit if they're fixed in space? But we just remember what things looked like in our high school, physics book, and then, okay, that's how it is. It arises and that evolves, change. Then it's permanent. Look at it. It's made of metal. This thing ain't gonna end anytime soon. Yeah, but it's changing moment by moment, isn't it? It's not exactly the same thing. Okay. So this is really very strong when you meditate on it, especially when you do it in terms of your body and how we feel like our body is so, this is the way it is and it doesn't change, and yet the body is continually changing. Yeah. And like I said, science tells us that too. We ate breakfast and already our breakfast is turned into something else, and the blood's flowing and carrying the different things out into the various systems in the body, and nothing's remaining the same at all from moment to moment. And yet when we look at our body, it's like, oh, this is the same body. Yeah. So that's why sometimes you might remember both in 400 stanzas and in Precious Garland, we refuted one view that some non-Buddhists have, that the essence of things is permanent, but superficially they change. Yeah, and we can see how that view, came about, because we feel like, well, there's a permanent self, but the things kind of around the self, they change. Or the body, is permanent, but yeah, there's some superficial things like my digestive system and circulatory system and, all these things that change. But the body in itself is permanent, or the self is permanent, But how can you have that? How can the object itself be unchanging if it has superficial change around it? Once one thing changes, everything is in motion. It means everything is in motion, yeah? So it's, but we have a lot of wrong views about this, that we hold on to in a very deep level, and these views provide us a certain sense of security in samsara. Yeah, but it's a false sense of security that eventually leads to suffering. Yeah. So, for example, I notice in looking at my mind that I really don't think I'm going to die. Yeah? I don't know about you, but when I look at my mind, I really don't think that death is going to happen to me. Yeah. Yes, of course, I'll get old. I can see myself aging. But death is not going to come. Now, right away in that, there's something that doesn't make sense. Yes, I'm going to keep aging. And what? I'm going to be 200 years, and then I'm going to be 300 years old and 400 years old? And what's my body going to be like when I'm 411 years old? Yeah? Really? Death is not going to come to me? I'm just going to keep aging? Yeah? And, as soon as you look at it, it's like, what a ridiculous idea. And yet, it's so on a day-to-day basis, it's in there, and it provides this feeling of there's stability. I'm not going to die. Yeah? Or if I die, if we eventually get to the point of, well, yes, if I die, but dying is just the superficial thing. There's still a permanent me that's going to go on to the next life. Yeah. There's a real self. There's a real soul. Something that's really me, that's permanent, that doesn't change, that doesn't decay. So yes, I get rid of the body. Yes, the mental aggregates kind of fade away. But the core essence of me, that's going on to the next life without changing. Yeah? Yes, our knowledge, our personality, yeah, yeah, good qualities only, we'll leave the bad ones behind. But we'll be exactly the same in our next rebirth. Yeah, we'll turn out exactly the same personality, same habits. We might even look like, in a future life, we might look like we look now. Except a younger variety. Everything that we have learned in this life, we'll automatically have when we're babies in the next life. So we'll be very wise adolescents. Yeah, there's this real feeling of permanence in there, isn't there? Yeah, and we can feel it in our gut, and that's like the automatic default mode of how we feel every single day. And yet, when we hear the meditation on impermanence and death, and the second point is the time of death is uncertain, we go, oh yeah, it sure is. Yeah, but we say that, and yes, that's definitely true. And we even in our meditation might imagine, dying today or tomorrow or the different kinds of things that we could die from, because the subsidiary points in that meditation. The body's very fragile. There's more things for promoting death and promoting life. So we think, yes, and I could die, and those things are true, and that happens. But still, it's not going to happen today, and it's really not going to happen to me. This is just a meditation we do. That kind of gets us a little energized to practice the Dharma. Yeah? Do you feel like that? When you really look at, when you do the meditations, how it comes out? And then once in a while, when you really get the feeling, I'm going to die, let alone you're going to die today, but, I'm going to die. It's like, there's this instinctive, horror, that I'm going to cease and not exist anymore. And that's the biggest thing we fear, I'm going to cease and will not exist anymore. And that's in there too. And you see, it's fear of that kind of fear of death that motivates us to practice. I don't want to die with that kind of fear of death. I don't want to die with a whole backpack full of negativities. Okay? But it's hard for us to get there because when we do have those sometimes glimpses, the veneer cracks and, oh, I'm going to die, we just don't know what to do with it. All of a sudden, it feels like the floor dropped out, like we're not standing on anything, and we're floating in the space of impermanence, and that's terrifying. And we react with terror and panic and so on. But actually, we're floating in the space of impermanence all the time. Yeah. When we have that, when the veneer cracks and we have that insight into it, even for a moment, we kind of think like, well, something's wrong, I better patch it up with feeling permanent and secure again. You know, like somehow my insight is what made me, you know, frightened. That's not true, you know. We're there's no bottom, there's no floor of permanence that we're standing on to start with. Yeah. Our mind has made up something fictitious that we believe in that gives us a false sense of security. But that has never existed and does not exist right now. You know? And that whole mechanism of, you know, creating this concept of a permanent me or a permanent whatever it is, yeah, that concept is the source of our pain and misery. The situation itself is not the problem. It's the concept that rejects the reality of the situation. That's the problem. Yeah? And so we have to keep doing the meditation and, you know, coming face to face with that concept and watching it crack apart and say to ourselves, there's nothing to be afraid of. This is how it is and has been all along. So I've got to accept change, accept that reality, and knowing that, you know, that I'm going to die and that I'm getting closer to death moment by moment, to abandon non-virtue and create virtue. Yeah. Instead of, I see I'm going to die, let's you know, let's go to the bar, let's go to the movies, let's have sex, let's eat chocolate, let's do something else, you know, so that I can bring back my false feeling of security. Yeah. So, so we really see, you know, I mean, we're falling in empty space right now. We feel quite permanent. We feel quite secure, don't we? But everything is changing momentarily, and death really could come today. Yeah, why not? All the other people, you know, every morning when we wake up, we feel like that. Death is not coming today, including all the people who are going to die today. All the people who are terminally ill, yeah, all the people who are going to get in accidents, every one of them woke up in the morning feeling it's not going to be today. Even I'm terminally ill, it won't be today. It'll be later. Yeah. And then death happens that day. And we go, wait, I didn't have that in my calendar. You know, impermanence is not supposed to be like that. Okay, so we really see, you know, how our wrong conceptions prevent us from seeing the reality and actively misconstrue things and then cause us pain and misery by making us create negativity, but also because when it's proven by our own experience that what we've been believing the whole time does not exist, then we just go, but, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Why didn't somebody tell me? Well, the Buddha's been telling us all along. We just haven't listened. Yeah? So the thing is, in our practice, really to get used to that kind of thing so that we can become fearless. Yes, everything's changing all the time. How do I develop some fearlessness in it? Well, first thing is when my plans don't work out for the day, not to get upset. That's like the first step in accepting impermanence, is whatever I have planned today, when it doesn't happen that way, to not be upset. I mean, that's the grossest of the gross, way. Because we make a plan for the day and then we think it's going to happen that way, and it's not. Yeah, so that's the first way to practice. Now, that what I think is going to happen today is going to happen. It's not going to happen. Let's be able to flow with what does happen, And then, of course, an offshoot of that view of permanence is our expectation that people are going to do what we want them to do. Yeah. And every day they don't do what we want them to do. So every day, again, practicing with people are not doing what I want them to do. This is the nature of samsara. Yeah, and learning to accept it. I mean, these are just practical daily life things to help us accept the reality of impermanence and help us accept the reality of dukkha, that nothing is going to be satisfactory for us. Okay. So let's go back to talking about the four qualities of four attributes of the First Noble Truth. But you can see how these attributes are really something to ponder, and that when you do, they really, when you chew on them for a while, then they really change something in you and help you to deal with things. Okay. So the second attribute of true dukkha, the polluted aggregates are unsatisfactory because they are under the control of afflictions and karma. So anything under the control of afflictions and karma is unsatisfactory. Except my boyfriend. At least for the moment. Yeah. Except this piece of chocolate cake. Except, the social status I have at this moment. Yeah. No, it doesn't have exceptions in this one. Yeah. But you see how our mind adds exceptions to it? Yeah. Yeah, sickness is unsatisfactory for sure. The way Congress is not working, that's unsatisfactory, But I just got an award and some praise today. That's very satisfactory. Okay. So understanding this counteracts the distorted thought holding things that are by nature unsatisfactory to be blissful or to be pleasant. Yeah, doesn't have to mean you're, blissed out, but they're pleasant. They make you happy. Yeah, due to being under the control of afflictions and karma, our aggregates are subject to three types of dukkha. So the dukkha of pain includes painful physical and mental feelings that all sentient beings consider suffering. Okay, so your body hurts, your mind is depressed, you feel sad, your mind is unhappy, something like that. Everybody recognizes that as suffering, as painful. So that's the first one, the dukkha of pain. So all sentient beings don't like that one and want to renounce that one. Yeah. So that's, renouncing that is not the meaning of renunciation. And it's not the meaning of samvega, of a sense of urgency. Okay? Then the dukkha of change includes happy feelings that are polluted because they are unstable, do not last, and leave us dissatisfied. Any pleasurable activity pursued continuously eventually becomes uncomfortable. Do we really believe that? Any pleasurable activity done continuously is eventually going to be uncomfortable? No, we don't believe that. I can eat chocolate cake piece after piece, 50 million chocolate cakes, and I'm always going to feel comfortable, happy afterwards. Yeah. When's that going to happen?
So if we truly believe in it, we will always remember it, or can we believe it but we forget about it?
Which believe what? Like any...
A piece of cake is
Yeah. Well, we believe it. This is our wrong conception mind that believes the cake is blissful.
I meant we believe that it's true what you're saying.
Okay, so we believe that it's true. Yeah, so we believe that it's true. But as soon as the chocolate cake is in front of us, out the window. Okay? And that's why, when there's pleasure in front of us, it's so hard to control ourselves. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because we really think that more is better. And so we run around trying to get more and more and more. And, it leads to pain and suffering. Yeah. There's a big thing now that, there's a rise in the death rate of middle-class white Americans. As soon as that happens, then people start paying attention. When it's minority people or lower classes, nobody pays attention. But middle-class white people, then, they're saying, what's happening? Why is this happening? And it seems like a lot of it is related to overprescription of opioids. Am I saying it properly? Opioids? Opiates. Yeah, opioids. Yeah, like oxycodone. Oxycodone? Yeah? Yeah. Well, it's a pain medicine, yeah, that is very effective if somebody is terminally ill or if somebody is just coming out of surgery and for short-term pain. But many doctors are prescribing it for chronic pain, and people get addicted to it. And there are more deaths from overdose of these kind of prescription drugs than there are deaths from heroin, cocaine, everything else combined. It's astounding, isn't it? And so people get addicted to these drugs that they got through prescriptions. Then they find all sorts of ways to get the drugs or get the prescriptions illegally, and then people overdose. Yeah? And so here was this medicine that, initially they were experiencing some pain. Let's say they have a legit prescription. Yeah? They have a legit prescription. They got the medicine. It alleviated the pain. They feel good. The mind starts thinking, more. Yeah? And the body also gets addicted. So you need more and more. And then pretty soon, this thing that brought you happiness and relief for suffering, you wind up with ODing on it and dying. Yeah? And so there's a big thing also in white neighborhoods, so now they're noticing it, about heroin use. Yeah? And all these young white kids are heroin addicts. I mean, it's just astounding what happened, that it has to happen to white Americans before anybody pays attention to it. That makes me really sick. But anyway, this is, the same thing with heroin, makes you feel good. More. Yeah. So some people, we're all basically addicts. Basically, it's just that we all have that addictive mind. It's basically that some people have illegal addictions and some people have legal addictions. Some people are shopping addicts. You know, they always have to buy something. Either they're going to the store, and just, you don't need to buy anything big, just little things, or always online. I just need some little thing. I need some little thing here. Some little part for something here. Some little this, some little that. Just the whole process of buying satisfies some kind of feeling of emptiness inside, But it just brings, credit card debt and a lot of family problems. But it's legal. They're not going to throw you in jail for it. And they say, what a good citizen you are. You're helping the economy. Yeah? So, this one, the dukkha of change, that, it's always that whatever we do that we think is pleasurable, in the end, is not going to bring lasting happiness. It does not have the ability to bring lasting happiness. And we can say that and see that so clearly when we're sitting here and there's not an object of attachment in front of us. And when our body is comfortable and, everything's going pretty well, we can see it so clearly. And then as soon as the body's a little bit comfortable, the mind is a little bit restless, or the object of attachment is in front of us, poof! Our understanding's out the window. So that's why they call it practice, because we need to practice these understandings again and again and again, in order to get them from the intellectual level down into here, so that they really can influence how we live. So that when we're reaching for the next whatever it is that we've already had too many of already, we can say, stop, I'm taking my hand back. That's not going to make me happy. In the end, it's only going to bring me suffering. Yeah? So for my own long-term happiness, stop reaching out to grab something. Yeah, that's real practice. It's hard to do. Yeah, but that's what real practice is. So again, we start with small things. Yeah. Start with, curbing in not buying something that ordinarily you would buy, or not going back for seconds and then not compensating that by taking 2 doses of first to start out. Or whatever it is, that we're wanting. I talk about how I like to save all the paper clips, the plastic paper clips. And whenever I have to give somebody something, I give them with the paper clips that are metal, because they're not as nice. And somehow my mind thinks that having plastic paper clips is going to make me happy. So I keep them for myself and give the metal ones when I have to give people some papers. But then, these plastic paper clips, and they're colorful, they're really pretty. They're so much nicer than the metal ones, aren't they? Yeah, they're really nice. They hold the papers together. But I like them so much that I don't want to run out of them. So I never use them, even for my own papers. Because if I use them for my own papers, then I won't have them anymore. And then I might be reduced to using metal paper clips, which is going to cause me suffering. Okay? So this is an hilarious example, but it's true. It's true. The mind wants to eke out whatever pleasure it can from whatever it can. Yeah?
When you gonna give up your stash of paper?
Well, I'm working on it. I'm trying, slowly, slowly, and I have to remember how I tell you the story of, how it was so hard for me to give 25 paisa to the beggars in India for a cup of tea. And I had to encourage myself and nudge myself. I have to do the same thing with the paper clips. But I instinctively start looking through the whole stash of paper clips for the metal ones to give somebody the papers. Okay. Okay, but this is a good thing, to look at ourselves and what we consider is going to make us happy that we can't give up. Okay, and then the third is the dukkha of pervasive conditioning, is the fact that our aggregates are under the control of afflictions, ignorance in particular, and karma. Okay, so that's the dukkha of pervasive conditioning. That's the one that's harder to acknowledge. All sentient beings don't want the dukkha of pain. Religious people of all traditions see the fault with the dukkha of change. Only Buddhists really can identify the dukkha of pervasive conditioning, because it means that everything that's under the influence of afflictions and karma, especially ignorance, is unsatisfactory. So that means from the get-go, having a body and mind like ours is something unsatisfactory. Yeah. Now this challenges, our whole feeling about who we are. What do you mean, this body's unsatisfactory? It's the only one I have. It gives me pleasure. It's my dearest object of possession. I don't want to ever be separated from it. This is our attitude. Yeah? And yet, just by having a body under the influence of afflictions and karma, we're subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death. That's a given. As soon as you have this body, you get, as soon as you have birth, then you get the other three. Yeah? Unless you die in the very next moment. But that's the reality of the situation. And that's a hard one for us to stomach. Because how we were talking the other day when a baby is born, oh, this is wonderful. And we say, just having physical pleasure, it's wonderful. We live for it. Having a mind that's under the control of afflictions. Sometimes, like with the body, we might say, well, this is too much. But mental happiness, we're addicted to mental happiness that comes from, approval and love and appreciation and status and praise and, do we see that as here it's not that the happiness that comes from those things, that's the second kind of dukkha, the dukkha of change. The third is talking about just having mental and physical aggregates under the influence of afflictions and karma. Just having them is unsatisfactory because even if you have a neutral feeling right now, at any moment, boing, you can go into pain. Yeah? So we look at people with, if you think of the people you're jealous of, okay? So whatever quality it is that you think it's wonderful that they have that you don't, yeah? So the usual things is, they're good looking, or they're rich, or they're educated, or they're famous, or they're talented, or they're athletic, or, whatever it is that we want to be but don't feel we're adequate enough to be, and they are, we think that that those people are never going to suffer. They have that. And once you have that, you've made it. Yeah? So we're being deceived by wrong views about two kinds of dukkha. First is the outward one, that having that particular thing is going to make you everlastingly happy. And the second one is just the underlying thing of having a body and mind under the influence of afflictions of karma. Any moment, that happiness gone, ends. Who was it? There was Sam. He had the same name as you, Tracy Morgan. That's how I remember. Is he a sports star or a comedian? So he got into a traffic accident, didn't he, some time ago, and he was very severely injured. Yeah. But when he got into that car, I'm sure many people were jealous of him and, wow, what a perfect life he has, and this and this and this. But just by having that body and mind under the influence, small thing, doing, goes to much great suffering. Yeah? So this third kind of dukkha, means that there's no security in cyclic existence at all, as long as we're under the influence of afflictions and karma. So our body cannot be our final refuge. Yeah? Our happy feelings and the people or things that cause them cannot be a final refuge, because, they're under the influence of afflictions and karma and can change to the opposite in a finger snap. Okay? So when you really meditate on, just even these first two of the four, impermanence and dukkha, if you really spend a lot of time meditating on this, it's like, I want to get out of samsara. Basta finito, I want to get out of here, this is enough. Yeah? And, because these meditations really take down our, all our fantasy stories, all of our misconceptions. Yeah? And so, especially those of us who are monastic, the whole reason for taking precepts should be our wish to be out of cyclic existence. And so that was our motivation. And then to keep doing these meditations to reinforce that. And for people who aren't monastics, anybody do these meditations, because we all want to get out of cyclic existence, don't we? Yeah, when you really see what it's like there's nothing good to be had here. Yeah, it's all kind of fake. Okay, so while we all want happiness, it eludes us because our body and mind are under the control of afflictions and karma. Understanding that samsaric phenomena are unsatisfactory, we turn away from seeing them as the source of lasting bliss and joy. We release unrealistic expectations of them, seeing that clinging to samsaric things is useless and frustrating. We relinquish clinging in favor of practicing the path and actualizing true cessations. Okay, so these meditations, very powerful, very important. Then the third, the polluted aggregates are empty because of not being a permanent, unitary, and independent self. So this understanding counteracts the distortion believing the body which is unclean has an impeccable possessor. Okay? In other words, well, I'll read the paragraph. Well, let me explain first. The non-Buddhists believe that there's a permanent, unitary, independent self or person, that is by nature blissful, especially if you separate it out from all these contaminated worldly things, and so they think that, okay, there's this permanent, unitary, independent self, which is completely pure and blissful, and it's the possessor of these polluted aggregates. So in a way, I mean, we can find that kind of notion in ourselves too. It gets in more when we start thinking self-sufficient, substantially existent person. But even this one, if those of us who grew up in theistic cultures, by and large, grew up with the idea of a soul, that somehow is this pure thing that possesses the body, But seeing the empty nature, that there's not such a permanent, unitary, independent person, then there can't be that kind of person that possesses the aggregates. So Theravada, Yogacarya, and Madhyamaka tenets have some similar and some different ideas about the meaning of the third and fourth attributes. An explanation that all Buddhist schools accept is that empty refers to the absence of a permanent, unitary, independent self or soul that is a different entity from the aggregates. Okay, that means that this self or soul, you can have the aggregates here, the person is something completely independent of them. Okay? So in this context, permanence means eternally unchanging, or just plain old unchanging, not produced and not destroyed. Unitary indicates not depending on parts, but being one monolithic whole. And independent refers to not depending on causes and conditions. So that's kind of the idea of a soul, isn't it? God gave you a soul that doesn't change. It's one unitary thing. You don't have parts of a soul. And it doesn't depend on causes and conditions. You have it. It's never going to change. And it's something different from your aggregates, because when you die, your soul leaves and goes to heaven or hell or wherever it goes. Okay? So this is a very gross view of the self or persons. It's a view that is created by philosophical misconceptions. But it's still the first view of the self that we have to tear down. And for some people who, it depends on your upbringing and what you were taught when you were little and how much you believed what you were taught when you were little. For some people, this is a big thing to get rid of, is this idea that I have this permanent God-given soul. So as we go through the other attributes of the Four Noble Truths, we'll see some other things that are completely the opposite of what we may have been taught as children in another religion. And so I think it's very important for Buddhists who have converted from, originally being having a theistic religion, or even growing up in that kind of culture, to really go through and look at all these kinds of things. Because if we don't, we soon find that after a while, they're kind of perking, popping up in our meditation as maybe we're trying to meditate on selflessness or emptiness, and we're going, no, because inside we're really hanging on very strongly to some things we were taught when we were quite young. Yeah, that we may not even realize that we have that kind of view inside of us, So it as we go through our practice, sometimes these things surface, and we have to look at them and see, I really do believe that. Where did that belief come from? Is it an accurate belief or, an inaccurate belief? And start, applying the antidotes to those things. Okay, then the fourth, the polluted aggregates are selfless or not self because they lack a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. So understanding this opposes the distortion, grasping that the aggregates which lack a self-sufficient, substantially existent self are such a self. Okay. The explanation accepted by all Buddhists glosses selfless as the absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. Such a person would be the same entity as the aggregates, a self that controls the aggregates like a ruler over his subjects. When we say I or my body and mind, we have the impression that there's a self who owns and dominates the aggregates. Don't we? We feel this self is not merely imputed on the aggregates. Okay. Here, merely imputed means the person cannot be identified without identifying something else, such as the aggregates. So this is a different meaning of being merely imputed, or being, being merely imputed, than what the Prasangikas say. Yeah, it's a much grosser level of being imputed. So what it means is that in order to identify, for example, the person, and say, Harry's here, we have to see his body, we have to hear his voice. There has to be some other thing that, we have to think of his personality. There has to be some other thing that appears to us in order to identify that a person is there. We don't just see the person per se. We say, I see the person, but in fact we're seeing the person's body. Yeah. We say, I hear Susan, but in fact we're hearing Susan's voice. Yeah. So this is the meaning of merely imputed here, that just something else has to appear in order for us to know that the person's there. Yeah. Yeah, so then based on that, we have this feeling of an I or a self that is like a master over the employees or a ruler over the subjects. Yeah. And so this is the kind of self that says, I can will myself to do this. I can make myself do it. Yeah. When in fact, there's no self-sufficient, there's no substantially existent self that can do this, but we feel like there is, If I only had enough willpower, then I could give away all my plastic paper clips. Yeah? In the Pali tradition, impermanent, dukkha, and not self are known as the three characteristics of things conditioned by ignorance. Okay, so you hear three characteristics a lot. Meditating on these three with insight is the core of the path. In the Sanskrit tradition, impermanent and dukkha are realized first, Then meditators focus on selflessness and emptiness together with bodhicitta. So in the Pali tradition, you actually completely, fully realize all three characteristics at the same time. Sanskrit tradition, no, impermanence and dukkha are easier to realize than empty and selfless. The Yogacarya school accepts the person as being empty and selfless. It also accepts the selflessness of other phenomena in that they are empty of being a different nature from the consciousness perceiving them, and are empty of existing by their own characteristics as the referent of a term. So you'll see, as mentioned before, for the third and fourth attributes of true dukkha, according to your philosophical school, there's going to be different definitions of what they mean because the objects of negation are different. Madhyamikas follow the meaning of empty and selfless found in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. Here, both words refer to the absence of inherent, true, or independent existence and apply to all phenomena across the board. Inherent existence is an essence that should be findable in the basis of designation and should exist without depending on being merely designated by names and concepts. A false mode of being, it is refuted on both persons and other phenomena. All phenomena are empty and selfless because they exist dependent on other factors. Okay, so this is going through the different definitions of these two according to the philosophical schools. Yeah, but it's very helpful for us to try and find each of the, feelings inside of ourselves. What does a self-sufficient, substantially existent person feel like when I'm grasping at that, when I feel that that's how I exist? What way does an inherently existent person feel like when that's really strong in my mind and I'm grasping that? Yeah. So these are much harder to detect, but again, it's things that we look at, we practice with over time. Yeah. So actually, every time we get upset about something, or every time we feel sorry for ourselves about something, it's a perfect opportunity to look at how we think the I or self exists. Okay. To tie these four attributes together, our body and mind change moment by moment. This is their nature. Our aggregates are controlled by their causes, which are ultimately traced to ignorance. Anything caused by ignorance is by nature unsatisfactory. It is the dukkha of pervasive conditioning. Once we develop this awareness, then no matter how beautiful, pleasurable, and enticing things appear, we know they are not worth clinging to. They are empty and selfless. Yeah, so they lack any kind of, here in the general meaning, they are not a self-sufficient person. Yeah. Reflecting on these four attributes of true dukkha is sobering and dramatically alters our perspective on who we are and what will bring us happiness, leading us to renounce craving for polluted aggregates and seek nirvana, true peace. The practice of the four establishments of mindfulness, which will be described later, is a powerful method to realize the four attributes of true dukkha. So remember when we went through the four establishments of mindfulness, and each of, the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena is especially related to one of the four attributes, even though actually all four pertain to it. So it's quite a powerful meditation. Okay, so we'll stop here. Yeah?
I do have a question just for clarification.
Uh-huh.
on the third and fourth one, then it says that an explanation that all Buddhist schools accept that empty refers to, versus says permanent unitary
Yeah.
independent self. The second one says that accepted by all Buddhist philosophies, selflessness has the absence of self-sufficient substantial existence. But down in the next paragraph it says that the Madhyamikas follow the meaning of empty and selfless found in the Prajnapada.
Right.
So they're not agreeing. When it says
Well,
all Buddhist schools, what does that
it means this is something that all Buddhist schools agree does not exist. A substantially existent person, they all believe there's no substantially existent person. On top of that, the Madhyamikas think there's no inherently existent person or phenomenus.
which not all the schools agree that there is such a
Not all the schools accept there's no inherently existent person, but they all accept that there's no substantially existent person. So when they say a view that's common, they all accept that there's no permanent unitary, independent person, there's no substantially existent person. But then the Yogacharyas have their own view. In addition to that, the Madhyamikas have their own view, which adds on more to negate in addition. Okay?